Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Palian Chinguo. I am the Director of Research at the Lost History Foundation. And this morning, I'm excited to be part of the conference and particularly to do a presentation on the history of Rastafari in Malawi, particularly talking about the migration and the Rastafari movement in Malawi as an organized movement. So my presentation will touch on the background of the paper, and then I'll do the introduction, and then I'll provide the political context, and then zero in to the question of migration. And under migration, I'll be talking about the role of a number of Rastafarians and their contribution to the development of the Rastafari movement in Malawi as an organized movement in the context of migration. So there are quite a number of Rastafarians that I can talk about, but for the purpose of this presentation, I will discuss four Rastafarians who have some contribution to the development of Rastafari as an organized movement in Malawi in the context of migration. So I'll talk about Ras Elijah Pegane, Ras Chris Madani, Ras Konwani Makina, and Aista J, as well as Custard Damena. And then I'll do the introduction, the conclusion for the presentation. So, with regards to the background of this paper, is to say that this paper or this presentation is part of the book project by the Lost History Foundation on the history of Rastafari in Malawi. And the manuscript for this book is currently under review by the publishers, and we expect the book to come out in the first quarter of 2026. And on the screen there is the book cover of the book. When it comes out, that's how it's going to look like. So the presentation this morning is an extract from the content of this book. Now, as a matter of introduction, Rastafari is often viewed through the lens of religion, spirituality, political resistance. It has traveled far beyond its Jamaican roots to find fertile grounds in diverse contexts globally. And Malawi is part of that fertile ground within the diverse context, and that's the subject of this presentation. Now, with regards to the political context, before we get to the question of migration and its connections to the growth or development of Rastafari as an organized movement in Malawi, it's important to talk about the political context in Malawi from 1964 to 1992. Malawi officially became an authoritarian one-party state in 1966, and Rastafari as an anti-colonial and Pan-Africanist movement focusing on the divinity of Emperor Haile Selassie fundamentally clashed with the ideology of the one-party state, right? So you couldn't talk about Emperor Haile Selassie as a god beyond Dr. Kamuzubanda. So Dr. Kamuzubanda was the semi-god. So there would be no any other human being beyond Dr. Kamuzubanda. So anyone glorifying His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie above Dr. Kamuzubanda or any other hero like John Chilembwe, if you begin to glorify him beyond or above Dr. Kamuzubanda, that would be a crime in terms of, undermining the status of Dr. Kamuzubanda. So you also got ideas such as socialism, communism, Pan-Africanism, which stress social justice, equality, and self-determination were considered threatening and subversive under the one-party state, right? So expression of such views was heavily censored, related literature was prohibited, and those who supported them could face persecution. So in that regard, you found books on African history, African nationalism, postcolonial Africa, Pan-Africanism, and the works of African intellectuals like Kwame Nkrumah were banned, right, by the state. And Rastafari, which partially draws on Pan-Africanism, was inevitably suppressed during the one-party state. Now, until we came to the political transition of from the one-party state to multi-party democracy, 1992 to 1994, that's when Rastafari began to shape or to take shape as an organized movement. We had the first two organizations of Rastafari emerging in 1992 and 1993, starting with the Discipline of Rastafari Movement, which was an organization formed in Blantyre in 1992. And then we had the evolution of Rastafari CAT, in short, TEWOC, which was formed in 1993. These were the first two organizations of Rastafari to be formed in the country. And immediately after that, we had the first congregations of Rastafari in the country. One was formed in Soche Mountain in Blantyre in 1994, and then the second one emerged in the Moody Forest in 1995, somewhere near Maselema in Blantyre. And then after that, over the years, within the next 5-6 years, we had congregations of Rastafari spreading across the country. But the first two emerged in Blantyre in 1994 and 1995. Now, migration played a pivotal role in these formative years of Rastafari as an organized movement. That is the period from 1993 to 1998. In what ways? Firstly, we had Malawians who were exposed to Rastafari during periods of residence abroad. And then when they returned to Malawi, they became cultural transmitters, catalyzing the formation of organized Rastafari congregations. Secondly, we had the presence of Rastafarians from abroad who stayed in Malawi, and in the process, they enriched the movement's formative years. And then I'll get into specific examples to touch on these two broad angles through which migration interfaced with the development of Rastafari movement in Malawi. Right. I can then talk about the first example of Ras Elijah Pagan. This is a child of migrants, right? His father was from Malawi. He was a businessman who had stayed in South Africa and married a South African mother. And then they came and stayed in Malawi to run their family business. And this young man went to St. Andrews High School until 1988. And then his father took him to Johannesburg. He stayed in Hebrew in Johannesburg, and then he was left alone. That's when he became exposed to Rastafari in Johannesburg. He started growing his logs, something that he couldn't do if he had stayed in Malawi in 1988, 1989. And then eventually he moved to Zimbabwe to do business, and then eventually he went to UK and came back to South Africa through Zimbabwe in 1991. He was now a Rastafarian based in Johannesburg. Then in 1992, he decided to get back home when the wind of change was blowing through Malawi at the beginning of 1993, especially towards the time of the referendum. That's when he decided to return home and talk to his father and to run a family business, to assist the father in running the family business. And then he was convinced that now, with the political change, he would not be persecuted as a Rastafarian. But when he came, the family had problems with him, with his new identity, and then they connived with the police and they forcibly shaved him. The locks were cut and so on and so forth. And then he was given an opportunity to run a family business in Zingwangwa, right? So when he was staying in Zingwangwa, that's when he started interacting with the youths in Zingwangwa. And he's considered as the first, Rasta man with a family. He had a wife, a South African woman he had met while he was staying in South Africa. He brought the wife and the child, and they were staying. And the country had never seen the Rastafari family, a husband, a wife, and a child staying together. So the people were fascinated, especially the youth. So they would go to his house and engage him into discussions. What is Rastafari? Then he'd share the literature and talk about his experiences moving across countries, Zimbabwe, South Africa, UK, and so on and so forth. And then he eventually brought in a guest, and this one would be the first international guest on a mission on Rastafari to come to Malawi. And he was Ras Chiedza from Trinidad, and then he had relocated to Zimbabwe. And when Ras Elijah was moving around, he met Ras Chiedza, and he brought him to Malawi. He hosted him. They brought literature, and they started distributing the literature to the youths in Zingwangwa and surrounding areas. And suddenly something happened, and then Ras Elijah and his family had to relocate to South Africa. And then the youths continued to interact and they were holding discussions using the literature that Ras Elijah and Ras Chiedza had brought to them. And then they continued. Eventually, they established the first congregation. It was established by these youths from Zingwangwa after being inspired by Ras Elijah. And we are talking about Ras Beki Bonjesi, Ras Kenan Koropa, Ras Brighton Matuta, Ras Yusuf Grant, and many others. So that's about Ras Elijah. And then immediately when Ras Elijah left the country, it was around 1994, there was Chris Madani. He was also a child of migrants. His father was from Malawi, who had worked in Zimbabwe and married a Zimbabwean mother. And he was residing in Nderande. And then one of the days he was passing through the Zingwangwa area, he met these youths now, who had converged, and they were discussing. And then eventually they connected so well and started talking about Rastafari and so on and so forth. And he was also sharing his experiences, moving across Zimbabwe, South Africa, where he was exposed to Rastafari and he became a Rastafarian. And then they exchanged ideas, experiences, and expanded their network. And it was from this group that the first congregation of the Rastafari was established in Soche Mountain. So Elijah had left, but then Chris Madan came into play, and connecting with others together, they formed the first Rastafari congregation. Right? So that's the experience of migration, moving around Zimbabwe, South Africa, bringing in that fusion of the experience with the youths from within Zingwangwa and surrounding areas, and then forming the first congregation of Rastafari. Then I can also talk about Ras Kondwani Makina. He left Malawi with his father to stay in Cape Town in 1991, where he was exposed to Black consciousness in Cape Town. And 1992, 93, he was, he embraced Rastafari as a faith. And then he had done matric in Cape Town. Then he was looking for a place to enroll for tertiary education. And then eventually he came to Malawi in October 1994 and enrolled for the first year, a diploma program in architecture at the University of Malawi Polytechnic in October 1994. And then that's when he met Ras Ray Halawa, because people were talking about this South African, because people knew him as a foreigner. There's a new student at Polytechnic. He's a South African. So people became fascinated because he had dreadlocks and so on and so forth. But when people interacted with him, he would say, no, I'm a Malawian. I was here. I was born here. I just went to South Africa and then I'm back. Then news spread, around Chitawira and the surrounding areas. That's where Ras Ray Harawa, who was then the leader of the second Rastafari called Tewoki, the evolution of Rastafari cut, heard about Ras Kondwani Makina at Polytechnic. Then he went, looked for him, and then they met. They started talking, discussing about Rastafari, and he shared his experiences from Cape Town, and then Ras Ray also shared his experiences locally. And together they explored the need to start congregating Then Ras Kondwani Makina eventually secured a venue at the campus at Polytechnic, and they started Sabbath gatherings every Saturday. After meeting a few times, then they moved to Moody Forest in 1995, which now became the second congregation of Rastafari, the Moody congregation. So that's Ras Kondwani Makina. And then moving forward, I can talk about two interesting characters from the diaspora who came to stay in Malawi for a while, and in the process, they contributed tremendously to the development of Rastafari as an organized movement. The first one is Aista J. Junior Manning. He was a Nyabingi Rastafari elder from Jamaica. He came to Malawi for the first time in October 1997 as part of the crew that came to Malawi as they were calling it Reggae Unite Africa. So they did 3 concerts in Blantyre, 2, and then they moved to Lilongwe for a concert, reggae music. And then when the artists from Jamaica, there were about 5 of them, when they returned he remained in the country for over a month. Then he went to Jamaica. He came back in 1999. We had now the first privately owned radio station, FM 101, which was established in 1998 as a product of the Reggae Unite Africa tour. So he came in 1999 to celebrate the first anniversary of the 101 radio. And then he lived in Malawi as a staff of Radio 101 FM. He was doing programs on Rastafari on the radio and also doing a farming business. So at the time, you would say he was the oldest Rastafarian in the country in terms of age, and he played an instrumental role in guidance, providing literature like Nyabingi guidelines and chants. He also contributed to the restructuring of the Nyabingi coordination at national level for better operations, and also facilitated for the consecration of the first Nyabingi priests. So he closely worked with the Moody congregation as opposed to the Soche congregation. So lastly, I would like to talk about Castor Damena. He was born from a Jamaican mother and Jamaican mother and Ethiopian father, right? So he was a priest of Nyabingi. Nyabingi is just a version of Rastafari. And he traveled to Cape Town for the celebration of the coronation of Haile Selassie as the emperor on 2nd November 1996. From there, he started his journey by road to Ethiopia. He had no passport, no travel documents, but he passed through, and eventually he came to Malawi at the end of 1996. Then, by chance, he met with the Rastafarians from the Soche congregation. And then he was hosted by the Soche congregation. At that time, that was 1996, the Nyabingi had just been established in the country in the same year. So he played that instrumental role to provide Nyabingi guidelines, Nyabingi chants, and he also assisted in the construction of the tabernacle in Soche Mountain for the Nyabingi, according to Nyabingi traditions, him being a priest. And he also provided some lessons on Amharic language, being an Ethiopian, and so on and so forth. So he had a tremendous impact as well on the development of Rastafari as an organized movement. After months staying with the Soche congregation, he proceeded with his journey to Ethiopia by road without travel documents. And then he went to Tanzania in 1997. In Dar es Salaam, he met with the priest Nimrod Chilambe. He had fled persecution in Malawi because he had embraced Rastafari in 1989, 1988, and then the terrain was not conducive for Rastafari. He had to flee the country to Tanzania, where he continued to embrace the faith and practicing the faith, and eventually became a priest of Nyabingi in Tanzania. So he met Castor Damena, and then Castor Damena was telling him to say, yeah, I was in your country. You know, Nyabingi has just been established, and I have assisted the brethren in this way and that way, and they really need a priest to provide support spiritually and otherwise towards the development of Rastafari. And he urged Nimrod Chilambe to say, please consider seriously to return to Malawi to contribute to the growth of the Nyabing and Rastafari in general, because the brethren and the sisters there, they really need support. So eventually, Priest Nimrod Chilambe, who had left Malawi in 1990, returned to Malawi in 1998 as a priest. And he also, contributed to the development of Rastafari as an organized movement in his role as a priest. So, in conclusion, what I wanted to say, or what the paper argues, is to say these transnational exchanges were not merely incidental, but instrumental in embedding Rastafari consciousness within Malawi's social and spiritual landscape. By situating the development of Rastafari within the broader framework of migration and cultural exchange, this paper contributes to the understanding of how global spiritual movements are localized. It highlights the intersections of mobility, identity, and resistance, and underscores the significance of historical and social dimensions in shaping of alternative religious and cultural identities in post-colonial Africa. Chair, let me stop there. And if there are probably questions and comments, I will be excited to attend to those questions and comments, and then move on. So over to you, Chair. Many thanks.